of the rats and the mice.
Yes.
And basically, he was very, very concerned by what he found. And I mean, it was effectively changing the whole of the structure of the stomach. And by using rats and mice, obviously, you see very quickly the prospect of what will take years to evolve in the human. And this was his observation. This was basically what he was saying. We just don't know.
Yeah.
We have no idea. We have no way of knowing what the long-term effects are. And the fact that we're seeing these extremely harmful effects on young mice and young rats should mean that effectively GM foods should not be allowed to enter the food chain.
Right.
Which would sound reasonable.
Yes.
There's only one problem, of course, that the biotech industry is very, very powerful. And the result of Dr. Putztai making that observation was that Monsanto, who controlled about 90% of the GM market, Monsanto contacted Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton called his buddy in 10 Downing Street, Tony Blair. Tony Blair called Philip James, who was the director of the Roa Institute. And a couple of days later, Arpad Putztai was suspended and gagged. He'd worked, you got to remember, I mean, this guy was, a guy who devoted his life to research at the Roa Institute. He had 30 years with the company. And because basically Tony Blair obviously threatened to pull the funding or whatever, but obviously Philip James did not have the courage or the cojones to support Dr. Putztai. And so Dr. Putztai was effectively fired.
How about that?
And, and in the last few weeks, literally, the independent newspaper in the UK has revealed the evidence to show that the European Union has been convening committees in secret. And the task of these committees has been to find ways to introduce GM foods into the European food chain.
Yes, absolutely. And also, generally talking well about it. I know that language has been skewed in order to make people more, receptive, as it were, to the positive effects of using GMOs. And of course, again, as we've talked about before, Ian, to put this in the context that this is some way are going to help us now also out of the so-called food crisis that we're kind of semi going through. But we haven't actually heard so much about that now when the economic thing are on the wall. But you know what I mean, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, it was last year. And, of course, in the middle of last year, when oil prices pushed up to $147, and as we discussed last year, I mean, it was totally manipulated.
Yeah.
Just as the 1973 oil price was manipulated by Henry Kissinger. And in 73, Henry Kissinger used the oil crisis to create a food crisis. And the result of the food crisis in 1973 was effectively the destruction of the American family farm. And most of the family farms were sold up because they couldn't live, and they were bought up by big agribusiness. So it created the opportunity for the agribusiness to effectively dominate agriculture in the US.
It's socialism, but in a capitalistic context, in a way.
Exactly. I mean, it's capitalistic to the extent of a market, but no competition because it's total domination.
Yeah,
it's greed.
Incredible.
It's fundamental greed.
Yeah,
without any regard for the effect on humanity. And of course, what we also know is that the number of acres of GM crops grown in the US pre-1980 was a big fat zero. And now, of course, it runs into hundreds of thousands, if not millions of acres. I mean, all the soy crop in the US is fundamentally genetically modified. And you've got this ludicrous situation in the US where you can still call something or label something as organic if it has up to 10% contamination.
Well, there you go. It's incredible.
It's just outrageous.
Yeah.
I mean, in Europe, it's actually 0.9 of 1%. So, 1/10 of the contamination of what the US permits and to still be called organic.
Yeah.
So Arpad Putzai, I mean, basically, the guy works in Hungary today. I believe he lectures at the University of Budapest. And obviously, he's going to be discussing his experiences at the hands of the biotech industry. And I'm sure he will share with us his current views on GM food and the biotech agenda.
Wonderful. And then, of course, there are a few more people that kind of follow up on this, I guess, and just will add more information to this. We have Scott Tips, for instance. We have Professor Susan Bardos. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but you can correct me on that one, Ian.
No, I can't correct you. I don't know how to pronounce it either.
Okay.
I think Bardosh. Yeah, let's say Bardosh.
Okay, right.
To see the spelling, they can go to the website.
Yes.
But yes, Susan Bardosh is actually Arpad's partner.
Mm-hmm.
And she also used to work at the Roa Institute, and today she is a full professor of nutrition at Budapest University. And I think the title of her talk is "Don't Put It In Unless You Know How to Take It Out."
That's good.
But yeah, there's a 13-year-old boy that's been in the news recently in the UK who fathered a son, and perhaps it would have been advice that he should have followed. But
that's a good one.
Professor Bardosh's talk and area of expertise is on the fact that with these GM products being released into the biosphere, we have no idea how to control them. She's used the analogy of nuclear power for a lot of people is pretty scary, and obviously what occurred in Chernobyl so many years ago now is still very fresh in people's minds. So we are all very aware of the potential power of an out of control nuclear reaction. But the reality is that that we know it can happen. But, there are safeguards obviously in place to stop it. And if things do get out of control, there's a very, very good chance you can actually switch it off. You can actually sort of shut down the nuclear reactor. With GM, you can't do that. Basically, once it's in the food chain, we have no idea where it's going, and we have no idea what effect it's going to have. And I mean, the one thing we can probably be pretty sure about is it ain't positive.
Yeah.
And very recently, there was a survey produced by a British university, which showed that, the contamination of the water supply in the UK due to a combination of both, GM products, although there's not very much of them in the UK at the moment, but coupled with the pharmaceuticals, and it's having a serious effect on both the plant and the animal life in the waters of the UK.
Yeah.
And one of the effects is that the animal life becomes androgynous.
How about that? Isn't that interesting?
So, consider the possibility that, what may already be in place is a process that is possibly irreversible, unstoppable, which humanity may ultimately wipe itself out through becoming androgynous.
Talk about population control. That must be the ultimate thing. And then obviously to put that in the context of blaming it on, it's an accident, it's chemicals, or the research might not even go that far if we ever would given a response to why this is happening. It's incredible. And what potentially are taking over this is the whole weird area of transhumanism. We don't need to go there now, but again, just keeping this in the back of our heads, as you let us know this, Jana, here, that this could potentially be the pave way for the genetically modified human being and the cloned human being, even, that this will be the only way for us to reproduce, as it were.
Exactly. And, and there are undoubtedly those who would very much like to see that happen, so that they can literally control the type of being that is effectively procreated.
Yeah.
So that effectively it becomes an economic slave. And, doesn't this smack of history repeating itself?
It does. Absolutely.
Yeah. in a very big way. So, there is obviously, in the first instance, we must educate ourselves on what is occurring, and we must educate ourselves on, effectively the mentality of the people behind this agenda. And, that brings us to perhaps the third person on the speakers panel, who is leaning towards the food and pharmaceutical and health side, and that's Scott Tips, who's the president of the National Health Federation in the US. Now, Scott is, as the president of the National Health Federation, also has observer status on the Codex Alimentarius Commission. And the National Health Federation is, in fact, the only consumer health organization that has observer rights on the Codex Alimentarius Commission. So, Scott is an amazing guy. I mean, he attends as many of the Codex Alimentarius Commission meetings as he can. And, I mean, he knows that basically what he's trying to do is slow the process down as much as he possibly can. Meanwhile, hopefully, people will start to realize what's occurring and start to vote with their feet and, probably more importantly, their wallets.
Yeah.
And also what is interesting is that Scott is about to launch the European chapter of the National Health Federation, and this will be launched at a meeting in Cowbridge. The information is on my website on March the 17th, so just under a month from now. And Scott is totally dependent. I mean, his whole organization is totally dependent on donations from the public. He really he's not interested in taking donations from industry, because it is a consumer health organization and not an industry representative at Codex. And so Scott is going to talk about his experiences with the Codex Alimentarius Commission and how it is, and he's going to explain, from his first-hand experience, how it is that the pharmaceutical industry is effectively trying to destroy the complementary and natural health industry.
Very interesting, and it might be good to have a kind of a European outlook on this as well, because I know that the WTO, for instance, have been pressuring the European Union to, allow. They have been critical of GMO and things like that for a while, but then the WTO allegedly have given pressure to Europe to now you must allow genetically modified food into your food supply or your food source, as it were. And again, the EU seem to have turned on this issue now and seem to very much be a proponent of it. So we'll see how that pans out, of course. But I think it's good to have a European base out of that. So I'm glad to hear that.
Absolutely. I mean, there is another organization, which is the Alliance for Natural Health. And the Alliance for Natural Health did used to have a seat on the panel at Codex, but now that they have elected not to pursue that route anymore, actually it's very clear cut now, because the Alliance for Natural Health is actually addressing the health-related issues, the GM, the complementary natural health-related issues at the EU level, and the National Health Federation is addressing these issues at the Codex level. And in my opinion, both are as important as each other.
Yes.
And what I hope to God that we do not see is any kind of perceived competition as to whether the National Health Federation addressing Codex or the Alliance for Natural Health addressing the EU, whether one has more potential effect than the other. They are both extremely important, and they both need consumers' support, which of course starts with having an awareness of what they're doing.
Absolutely.
And Robert Verkerk had his opportunity at AV1 last year in Totnes, and Scott Tips will have his opportunity to explain his work at AV2 in May.
Wonderful. Really looking forward to hearing more about that. Who else is going to be attending the conference here? Who would you like to begin with? I guess we can mention at this point, if we want to dovetail with the European Union and the whole area of actually common purpose. Brian Garish will be there. I think that's great that you got him on board.
Yeah, Brian is an amazing guy. I mean, he is